My name is Haley Meissen. I'm a recruiter for Keyot's Crew 212 program, and I'll be serving as your facilitator for today's session. Before we get started, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items for our virtual meeting today. The first one is if you feel comfortable, we would love for you to turn your video on. It is so much more fun and engaging to have a conversation where we can see your faces. If you don't feel comfortable, we understand too. Second, we'd like for you to go ahead and mute yourself using the button on the bottom left. We also ask that you remain muted throughout the remainder of our meeting, just to make sure we can hear our panelists and hear all the questions that are being asked. However, we do love and encourage all of your questions. You can put those questions in the chat button at the bottom of the screen, and those questions will go directly to our team so we can answer as many as possible today. Our last piece here is our agenda, and we like to keep it pretty simple. So first, I'll share a few statistics about our labor market and what we're looking at right now, and then we'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll just go ahead and dive right into our questions. So to kick us off, I'm going to share a very short PowerPoint with you. Perfect. Well, first of all, welcome to Live from the Keyot Café. Our topic for today is It's Summer and You're Unemployed. And our goal is to help give you some tips and advice. But first, let's talk about the reason so many of us are on this call today and so many of us are thinking about this topic right now. And that is the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has left a huge impact on our country in a lot of different ways, especially on our unemployment and our job market. So this graph here is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What I'd like to point out is pre-pandemic, our unemployment rate was 4.4%. And as of June 2020, our unemployment rate was 11.1%. So altogether, that totals to about 18 million Americans are currently unemployed. So that is a big number. As you can see on the graph, that's the highest we've had in about 20 years. But one positive note I like to point out is that number has gone down over the past couple of months. If you see in April, right after the pandemic happened, our unemployment rate was much higher than it currently is today. Many of those on the call today are what we call young professionals. So you're either just finishing up college or you're just starting 1 or 2 years into your career. So let's take a specific look at you and what your current labor market looks like. The unemployment rate for those ages 20 to 24 is about 25%. So about 1/4 of all of our young professionals are currently unemployed. In addition to that, many of those on the call today are May 2020 graduates who may have had an offer from a company that was then unfortunately rescinded due to the current economic circumstances. And that makes up about 8% of employers across the United States. And lastly, our third group on the call today are those who might have had an internship plan for this summer. And then unfortunately, that internship was canceled just due to the virtual environment and the current weight of the world. And that's about 1/3 of internships that were canceled this summer. You might be hearing these statistics, you might be thinking about your current experience, and you might be feeling a little bit like this. And that is okay. It is okay to be stressed and anxious, and you might be like that puppy that just wants to curl up in a blanket and sit in your house all day, but you are not alone. I just mentioned there's 18 million people unemployed, and about 1/4 of those are young professionals. There are lots of people in your shoes, and our goal for today is to help you feel more empowered, informed, and prepared to handle this time. What is in your sphere of influence? What can you control and what can you keep doing even during this gap time and downtime while you're looking for a job? So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists who will be speaking today. Our first panelist is Caroline Keyot, who is a rising senior in college. Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so like Haley said, my name is Caroline Keyot. I am a rising senior at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, studying finance and management information systems. A little background on my experience thus far in college is these past summers I've spent time interning at both technology and venture capitalist firms. And then this summer I'm interning at a consulting firm.
Caroline's summer actually has taken a big drastic turn from what she expected, so we'll hear a little bit more about that later. Thank you, Caroline. Our second panelist is Sean Anderson, who is a recruiter at Keyot and has been for the past 2 years, and he'll be sharing more on his perspective about hiring and what he's seen. Sean?
Hey everyone, my name is Sean Anderson. I'm a Crew 212 recruiter with Keyot on our Iowa team. My background's in business analytics, but my true passion is really helping find graduates a great career and helping them build it. I help support our Crew 212 team by providing analytics and helping facilitate the onboarding process as a whole. So very happy to be here today on the panel and looking forward to answering some of your burning questions.
Thank you, Sean. And our third panelist is Jeff Miller, who's an executive leader at Wells Fargo with over 20 years of experience. So Jeff will be sharing his experience with us today and shedding some light on the future of work and what that might look like. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, thanks for having me. Like Kelly said, my name is Jeff Miller. At Wells Fargo, I sit in the commercial bank or the wholesale bank, and we're a team of internal consultants that are constantly looking for improvements, process improvements, and that we also use tools like automation, intelligent automation, robotics, to realize those. So we've been a huge fan of the Keyot team and the Crew 212 specifically. We've got a lot of those folks on our team now and graduates of that program. And so looking forward to having a good discussion and helping with any questions you might have, any perspective.
Thank you, Jeff. So now we're going to go ahead and just dive into some questions. So like I mentioned, any questions you have, go ahead and throw them in the chat button at the bottom of the screen. And let's just go ahead and start off with Caroline. So like I mentioned, your plans for the summer were not quite what you expected, and you received some challenging news this spring. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I was planning on doing a consulting internship that would have been full-time travel Monday through Thursday. And then it would have been a 10 or 11 week internship, so all summer. And because of COVID and the changes to travel and a little bit of everything else, that changed a lot. So my 11-week internship turned into a 2-week internship / boot camp that was fully online. So that gave me a lot of extra time this summer that I wasn't initially expecting.
Mm-hmm. As a follow-up to that, Caroline, what have you been doing this summer to keep yourself busy and occupied?
Yeah, so at school, I've spent a lot of time developing my professional skills, and I've also was planning on doing that this summer. So this extra time has given me a lot of really great time to develop some of my other passions. So personally for me, I've spent a lot of time learning about other things that I'm really interested in, like cooking, global politics and economics, and world religions. So not all things that are directly related to my career, and also a few things that are.
Perfect. Actually, I want to bring that question over to Sean and Jeff. What are some activities you suggest doing during a gap in unemployment?
Yeah, great question, Haley. One thing I would recommend is taking on side projects that are related to your desired role. This will help show potential employers your genuine interest and drive within your work, and that you're maybe not just in it for a paycheck. I'd also recommend looking at webinars or different conferences to join. These will help build your industry knowledge and keep you sharp. There's also a number of tools you can use online to help build some of your technical skills. I know personally I've used DataCamp and LinkedIn Learning before, but there's other tools as well, like Code Academy, for example. Lastly, to Caroline's point, it's very important to focus on yourself and some of your personal interests, or maybe even your mental health, because during the pandemic, I know a lot of people are going through stressful times, especially while being on the job search. So maybe setting a weekly fitness goal, for example, or picking up cooking or woodworking. Those are some great things to get your mind working in a different way outside of your professional job search.
Yeah, I think this is Jeff. So I agree with what Sean said. I'd also add, that part about increasing your knowledge and self-education. I know you may have just came out of school and you're like, that's the last thing I want to do, but that can be done in a number of ways. If for instance, you want to pursue something in a financial career, Like Sean said, there's many, free resources out there. Khan Academy comes up, which is some great, basics on, how does the financial system work, and what is commercial banking, and how do you do lending? That stuff matters. And then the other piece of it is just, maybe offer yourself up to a local business, whether a small business or even a large business, and say, look, I'm willing to, get involved, get engaged, and don't bring up the, compensation item, but at least you're offering yourself and getting involved. That could also be with an academic institution, but you want to be able to say at the end of this that you've done 5 things, and they're tangible items that you've accomplished, even though maybe it wasn't with a professional firm or something with a formal contract, employment contract.
Yeah, jumping off what he said, I actually took the initiative to get involved with the local nonprofit during my time and volunteer, and I wasn't getting compensated anyway, so I figured I might as well spend some time volunteering at a place that I really cared about. And through that, I was able to work on some communication skills and other things that would eventually translate well into work.
A good follow-up to that would be, of course, so during this downtime, people are taking advantage. They're learning new things. They're building up their skill set. How can they talk about those things they've been doing in an upcoming job interview?
Yeah, there's a number of ways you can talk about how you've applied some of these skills. I think one of the biggest things is if you have had an internship or a job that's been rescinded, talk about what you've done in supplement of that. So talk about how you've applied some of the skills you've picked up in the meantime and how you've really filled that time.
Yeah, I agree. I think like you said, be very, very open about it. It's something that people are going to they're going to ask if you're not kind of bring it to the table proactively. So I think you kind of acknowledge that this is what happened, but again, here's what I did about it. And obviously in parallel, you've been pursuing other opportunities, but make it productive. And you'll look back and say, I wish. You don't want to say, I wish I would have used that time more productively.
Following that, I know a few of our job seekers here have been wondering, should you include a rescinded internship or rescinded job offer on your resume?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few different methods you can use to show a rescinded opportunity on your resume. A lot of people still will include the job description, the employer, and the dates that they were anticipated to work through, but may include a small note that says it was rescinded due to COVID. When talking about these experiences, I think it's important not to bash the employer or to focus on what you could have learned, but to focus on why you chose that employer, what you were hoping to learn, and how you learned that in the meantime.
Well, this next question, I want to gear it more towards Jeff. We've seen a huge increase in remote work and virtual working. How do you think that affects applying for jobs? Does your geographic location matter as much anymore?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic, right? You could answer it many different levels, and I think it'll be an ongoing discussion, in the industry. It also has a business continuity, lens to it. But tactfully, what I've observed over the last 4 or 5 months is there really has not been any, issues with our hiring. We've been doing quite a bit of hiring. We traditionally have made a determination to hire in specific regions, and when you can't, and the job, maybe just doesn't make sense to bring people into a single site, you're using, audio-visual capabilities like Zoom and other technologies like that. So we've already been doing that, and you want to be consistent when you use it. So I think this just made it very consistent, right? Every time we interview now, it's either fully by phone or using some type of video capability, and it's not impeded. I think it's just the way things have evolved. And there's books out there already on how, to interview, over a virtual setting. So I think, doing things like this, what you're doing, and, there's etiquette that I'm sure I'm not using right now that I should be. But I don't think it's impacted. I think this will be more of the norm where, when you're applying for jobs that will be using audio visual. But that said, I still think, there's for certain jobs, and especially if it's, a more of a customer facing job or something where you're going to be relying on your interpersonal skills more heavily. I would, expect that face to face, we'll certainly come back, as we get through this challenge. I don't know if you asked it, but, you talk about the remote work and what does that mean as you're applying? I still do think, that's open for discussion. In other words, I'm, in a city that I wasn't going to be considered for before. Is that something that I might be more viable now? I don't think that's really, fully vetted yet. I still think there's good reason to have people concentrated together. And I if I were you, I would, assume that, eventually you'll want to be around and collaborating. Caroline talked about consulting. I mean, obviously that's a good example. You'd want to be, there's a lot of the jobs that we do, there's times when you want to be in person. But again, when you're interviewing, I think, you can think of this as a new norm, and it's just, in my mind, it has a lot of the same benefits, and I don't see a real drop off because of the use of the technology.
We have a question from our audience to follow that up. What are some specific tips you have for virtual interviewing or interviewing over the phone where you can't see your interviewer?
Sean, you want to take that one?
Yeah. One tip for virtual interviewing, I'd say if there is a video component, would be to have, a well-lit space, make sure your background is professional, well suited for the environment. I think it's important to, if you do have a smaller space that includes your bed, make sure your bed's made, make sure your closet doors are shut, there's no loose clothing hanging out, there's no piles of loose belongings in the background as well. So I think your background is important, and what you choose to wear is also important. Although I know a lot of people are in a virtual environment where they've let some of their professional routines kind of go a little bit more casual. I think in a professional setting where you're interviewing, it's still important to wear a polo, a collared shirt if you're a guy, or something of that nature for females as well.
Yeah, and I would echo off of that. If it's a phone interview, I would maybe test it out with a friend before, make sure the audio is clear, that you are clearly communicating, and maybe even do a voice recording, because truly your whole presence is in your voice. And so making sure that you speak intelligently and clearly, probably test out some questions you think they might ask and have a couple answers right by, because there's no video. You really have an opportunity to have a couple notes nearby, maybe something you researched on their company, or some things that you want to make sure that you talk about to highlight some of your skills. You have the ability to have that written out right next to you if you want to. So really take advantage of actually using that as a benefit that they can't see you in one standpoint. So I would also look at, it's not always a negative.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you can distinguish yourself with the video, and you don't want to have people flying in the background. You don't want so be as professional as you can, and don't look at it as any other different environment than you would. I think that's kind of the key. I agree with the point around the notes. I think it's also okay to have your notes on the video. Shows that you're prepared. I mean, you can't be looking down the whole time, but certainly be referencing notes. I think is a good shows that you have preparation, that you've taken the interview seriously. But yeah, I mean, my general advice is treat it no differently. Like a lot of times we'll do, we've been doing before COVID, we would have people come into our location for a video conference, again, to be equitable based on everyone having, even if you're local, So those are in an office environment, and you're on video. So I think just think of it as you're in an office or you're in a formal interview. Should be no different.
Our next question is, do you have any advice for networking during this time?
That's a great question. Networking is definitely tough right now, especially in person. I think it's especially difficult to build your network right now. And I think you have to get creative. And one of my tips would actually be to, instead of looking to build your network, would actually be to better utilize your existing network. So we all have, family, friends, neighbors for the most part, and reaching out to them can give you great insights and foot in the door opportunities. I know I gained a lot of benefit just from calling up my neighbors and asking them what they did for a living and why they did it. What was their interview process like? What have they learned? What was the most impactful project they've worked on? Do they have a referral program? Is there a job shadow opportunity? A lot of the best traction you'll get in your job search is going to come from within your existing network. I think it's really important to build your network at all times, but I think a lot of the opportunities you're going to find, especially right now during COVID, is going to come from within.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, where you get a chance, certainly expand it. But you're going to have to be, I would be bold and in how you're trying to expand the network, but, don't be overly annoying, right? You don't want to be going and trying to expand, without merit. A lot of times, I think to build what Sean said, use somebody who's existing and maybe have them do an intro. So you spend some time, demonstrate that you spent time to make that connection. But, I definitely will look for people who are, do a smart and a proactive approach to networking, right? But what I won't do is respond to everybody on, a social, site where they're just, clicking a button, right? But if you put some time into it, I think you can do networking and, have a phone call and exchange emails, etc. So definitely would agree, build on existing, but, don't count out, trying to make some new connections as well.
Yeah. And I can speak to current college students or recent grads a little bit because I know in my personal networking experience, both through coronavirus and prior, that there are very few industry professionals, if you're reaching out to learn about something, that will totally ignore you or don't want to talk. If you're a student and you say, hi, respectfully introduce yourself, say, I'm learning about this, and I would love to hear more about how that's impacted your work. And, I have 15, would you be interested in, a 15-minute phone call? I have very rarely gotten denied from those requests, especially when you're not just aimlessly trying to meet more people, but you really have a desire to learn about something specific. So know what you want to learn about and then seek out those people really specifically and then give them like very tangible things. I need a 10-minute phone call, a 5-minute phone call. People will be very interested. And then also I'd recommend using your college's alumni networks. I know my college has specific LinkedIn pages for my business school and for my school as a whole. So if there's a specific company you're targeting or an industry, looking for alumni from your own school that's in that company or in that industry is a great way to get connected during these times.
Do you have any specific tips for using LinkedIn for networking?
One tip I'd share is that sometimes jobs will share who the hiring manager is. So sometimes you can reach out and create a connection that way. I know there's a lot of job opportunities right now that have changing timelines. Maybe they're being delayed. Maybe the opportunity no longer exists. So reaching out to a hiring manager and getting some clarity on their job posting could be a good way to connect.
I would say one thing I think that could be utilized during this time is there's LinkedIn groups or pages that you can request access to if you're interested in a specific industry or maybe a larger company. or again, your school. And that's a great way to kind of get to know a little bit more about that industry, learn by reading through some of those pages, and then reaching out to maybe someone that's active on that page and asking for a short introduction.
Yeah, I agree with Caroline and Sean. I mean, again, demonstrate that you've done, made an investment on your side. So either by joining groups, doing research, and, when you do send a note and engage with somebody, make it very thoughtful, versus just a request for a connection.
Our next question is a clarification question from our audience. Something that Sean mentioned there is, if a job posting lists who the recruiter is or who the hiring manager is, what are your views on reaching out to that person before you've even gotten a phone interview request or moved into the process?
That's a great question. I think it depends sometimes on the job, the size of the company. But I think to Caroline's point, it's really great when you reach out and ask a question about just wanting to learn and not necessarily asking for an interview right out the gates.
Do you have anything you'd add to that, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, again, I think you like to see the bold interactions, but again, make it demonstrate that you've actually done the homework, and you're not just doing this because it's one of 100 irons that you're pursuing. Show that, hey, this is why you think you're a great candidate based on your experience, and here's 3 things that I want to talk to you about that I need some clarification on, or I think I can help you with maybe what you're trying to do. And by the way, I was just looking at my video here. I guess I have a bad glare, so I'm not demonstrating good etiquette here myself. So nowhere near what Caroline has. Now, if you had like a backdrop, like, maybe of the company you're going to or something like that, those are the types of things. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I think, again, I think you want to be aggressive, you want to be bold, but do so to demonstrate you've made an investment, right? Don't just, go after a broadcast, not to say anybody would, right? But demonstrate to that person that, you're really interested and you've really done some work, and you can have a good conversation. And I think most anybody will be, receive that well, because down the road there might be an opportunity, even if that one that you're specifically targeting doesn't pan out.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree with you, Jeff, on the showing your demonstrated research part. One of my pet peeves is when I get a question that's just a one-liner, and it's a very simple question that's found on the website. When I get questions like that, it makes me think that they didn't want the job enough to do some pre-research. So demonstrating that have made that investment is really important.
Exactly.
Another question we have from our group here is, unfortunately, we also have a lot of people on the call today who may have started a job, worked there for a month, maybe 2 months, and then were unfortunately let go. How can they talk about just that very brief time with that company in an interview?
Yeah, they can definitely talk about the impact they made while they were there. They can talk about, I brought this up earlier, but why you chose that company. Was it the company culture? Was it they were on the forefront of technology? Was it you had a great relationship and with a mentor? So kind of highlight what you found valuable of that experience and where you made an impact. And then if you did lose that job due to COVID, maybe you can add in a note, our department lost, several million in budgets, or 25% of our sales staff was laid off. So adding some context to that also helps.
Yeah, agree. Again, number one rule is, just be honest, and, make sure you maintain integrity. There's no issues with, leaving a job or, getting laid off. It is what it is. And, the first thing I ask people when I talk to them is, how many times have you failed? And what are some of the biggest challenges you've had? I mean, anybody can excel when things go their way, right? It's you know, how did you persevere through the challenges? So, you know, hey, I had some great experiences. Here's what happened, and now here's what I'm doing, right? But yeah, leverage every bit of, you know, experience you had, even some of the plans maybe you anticipated you'd do and you didn't have a chance to do. But again, if you're genuine and if you're, you know, hardworking and you demonstrate that you're willing to do whatever it takes, you know, that's the most important, at least the thing that I'm looking for.
So this next question, you know, earlier we talked about there's a lot of free courses and free classes being offered, like Khan Academy, Udemy, Coursera. I think Yale even has a course out you can take for free. How do you prioritize what are the best classes or the best professional development to focus on?
So I can talk briefly about my experience with those kind of courses. One, I think of the best networking questions I've asked is when I do get that opportunity to talk to someone in industry or someone at a potential company that I want to work at, a great question to ask them is, right now I have a lot of time and I'm trying to figure out how to best utilize that to make myself the best possible candidate for blank position. What would you recommend as a skill or an attribute that I could develop in this time? And that's helped me a lot. I feel like I've gotten, through asking that to several different professionals, I've gotten repeat answers in certain areas, and that's helped me really narrow down, okay, so a lot of people think that skill is really beneficial right now. That's probably something that's worth spending some time on.
Building off of that, I would say maybe narrow your job search down to 3 main jobs and understand the qualifications that go into each of them and how you can match those courses to those qualifications. So maybe you learn that SQL or R is a big qualification or responsibility within your top 2 jobs. That would be a great area to focus your search using those platforms we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I really like what Carolyn said. Is that, you know, everybody you talk to, you should be asking, hey, what can I do to improve myself? Who else can I talk to? I mean, those should be your 2 first and last questions that you get out of it. And then, you know, to Sean's point, I would, you know, building that plan to develop yourself and talking about that would be something I would talk about, right? Because to your point, Haley, there's so much information out there. So what process did you go through? Like Sean said, I narrowed it down to this, and then I got some, you know, some insights and recommendations from people I spoke to. And then after I selected the 10, you know, things I was going to go after, I became, you know, as deep and knowledgeable as I possibly could over a 2-month period. And I wrote a paper or I did a blog, right? So, you know, it's taking somebody through that whole, because that in its own right is problem solving and demonstrates initiative. So, I mean, it's a massive information out there. And really, I genuinely believe if I had more time, I would spend more time, you know, even at this point in my career, and just learning, right? Because you're constantly need to kind of re-educate yourself.
Another question we have is, right now, a lot of folks are on the job search and they're not sure when that job search will end. What tips do you have to help them maintain motivation and not get burnt out during this time?
I think starting by that, I know the recruiting process can be exhausting. So I think making sure that at the start of it, you set realistic expectations and some tangible goals. I think both of those things can be really helpful to pace out the process, whether it's reaching out to a certain number of people a week, doing X amount of company research per week, and then creating some expectations that right now in our current market, it might not, the first job you interview for, you might not get. And it's not necessarily, don't take it personally. It's not because you weren't a good fit for the job, but it's just a tough job market right now. And so I think setting those expectations so you aren't so sure you're going to get the first job you apply for. And then that can cause a lot of, I think, just mental anguish and burnout pretty quickly.
I would completely agree. Goal setting would be a great way to kind of make sure you're hitting a certain number of jobs per week, for example. But I think in order to really not get burnt out, it's important to diversify your strategy as well. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't be doing all of the easy applies on LinkedIn. Make sure you're really taking the time to thoroughly fill out those job applications, using your internal network, using phone calls, email conversations, LinkedIn messages. So using different platforms, I think, will also help you avoid burning out.
Yeah, it's a good question. I agree. It's painful, right? I've been through it a couple times in my career, and it's just really difficult to do and get yourself motivated to do it well. But you have to, right? And it's something that I like the ideas of setting goals, of certain things you're going to do, but and like Sean said, be targeted. Definitely don't just. I don't think more is more in this case. I think being targeted and deep on the selective opportunities you're going to go for. To me, the number one differentiator is a good, well-written cover letter, right, on an application that demonstrates, again, that you've invested time in researching the job, the company, but that is, I'm a conceptual person, right? I'm a more of a cognitive, I can kind of quickly grasp ideas, but I just don't enjoy writing. And it's really hard to write a good, concise cover letter. Like Mark Twain said, I didn't have time to write a short one, so I wrote a long one, right? So, but if it takes you 2 days to write a cover letter, it takes you 2 days to write a good cover letter, right? So I think it differentiates. And then once you've done that, I think you're going to have much more success than, applying to 50 jobs, just kind of more blandly over on LinkedIn.
Follow-up question to that are, what do recruiters specifically want to see when they're looking at a cover letter?
I think there's a lot of things that you can add in a cover letter, showing how your experience matches the job description, talking about why you chose the company, how it supports your long-term goals as a professional is always great as well. I think demonstrating your pre-research is really important too, and understanding how it can really utilize your past experiences and further develop them. To be honest though, I don't look at a lot of cover letters. We're focused on the resume versus the cover letter.
I know in the past as well, both for cover letters and resumes, some advice I've been given is that a resume and cover letter can do a lot more to, it will help you get in the door, but it also can really hurt you. So I would say when you're crafting those resumes and cover letters, make sure that they're grammatically perfect, because ultimately, if this resume and cover letter is the apex of your professional self, then it should be very well done. And so I think sometimes even a recruiter, like I've heard recruiters tell me that there was one misspelled word and they tossed the resume out, because people want professional employees. And so I would make sure that as you go through, have your friends or your family or parents read through and just spell check. Even if they don't understand what the words are, just have them spell check and grammar check both your resume and cover letter.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you should have at least 3 other sets of eyes on your resume and cover letter before you're submitting it. Whether it's career services, a parent, a friend, a professor, those are all great different perspectives to have. And they may all have different tips and advice to tailor your resume.
Yeah, agree. Get at least one, or like Sean said, 3 folks to review it. And hopefully your resume, you're just tweaking it to highlight, but even those tweaks, you could make a mistake, and there's absolutely, you lost your differentiation at that point. So it's just easy to, like Caroline said, just toss it to the side, because there's 98 others that are perfect.
Besides Handshake, what are some job platforms I can use as I'm searching for jobs?
So LinkedIn is a big one, obviously. I know people have used Indeed and Monster in the past. I would say our focus is a lot of times too, companies will have their own job application form on their website. So that's a great tool to use as well. And it's also a great place to find really good information, not only about the role and the company, their culture, the organizations they partner with, and some of their initiatives kind of looking forward.
So our next question is, a lot of people may have went through college and had this one specific job in mind or this one specific industry they wanted to work in. And some of those industries, especially hospitality, travel, tourism, have been very heavily hit. So how much would you say someone should compromise in their job search? Should they be looking outside their area of interest?
So I would say it's situational, probably based on a little bit on the industry and on the job. What are your thoughts, Caroline?
Yeah, I would agree. I think right now, unfortunately, the world is not our oyster. And so I think there is some flexibility if you want a job upon graduation. But I think one thing that's really important is having some goals in mind and knowing that although I might think I know what I want right now for the next 40 years, I don't really know. And so being able to take some of those a little bit of leap of faith. And I think recognizing, okay, hey, if I do have a goal and that's to be X job, and I know that it requires these 7 skills, finding a job that might help you develop similar skills that would help you pivot into that kind of an industry might be a great first step, just recognizing, or finding a job like that is, there's a lot of companies that have like rotational programs for introductory jobs or varying levels of work that will introduce you to a lot of different industries. And those could also be some other jobs you could look into that will help you have a better overview of work.
Mm-hmm. And what you think you want isn't always what you actually need. I know myself, I came from a business analytics program and I thought the only jobs for me were a business analyst or a data analyst. And Keyot actually really helped me understand how I could apply my strengths and apply some of that data experience into a recruiter role. And to be honest, I never even considered recruiting and I knew nothing about it. And I've absolutely loved the last 2 years here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, when I first started, I wanted to be a rock star. And unfortunately, I didn't really have any skills. So, but I think it's, it's an old adage that's out there. It's like, what do you want to do? And then what's available in either the company or the marketplace. And then the third one is, what are you good at? Right. And then, those 3 things have to intersect in some way. So it ultimately, I think it's a personal decision on what you're willing to wait for, what you can wait for. And certainly, again, being honest with yourself, like, what are you at this point in time? What can you offer the company that you're targeting?
So as we've mentioned, a lot of individuals are unemployed right now. And let's say they're in the situation where they do get a job offer. They're so excited to have a job offer, but maybe the compensation wasn't what they were looking for. Do you think they should negotiate that salary or should they just accept the job as is during this time?
So I'll go on this one. This is a good, did this question come in or was this on the list?
This was on our list. I know compensation is a hard one for young professionals.
Okay. So first of all, you never get enough money, right? It's never enough, right? But at the same time, you're grateful for what you get. So I'll tell you my view. I think you need to negotiate even a little bit, right? And even if that's, hey, well, what about this? Like, I respect that. And even if I can't do anything about it, I respect it. So if you've made it that far, I would go ahead and negotiate a little bit. You may not get anywhere, but again, at least you try. Now you got to have hopefully you'll have some, a business case behind it, so of some extent, right? But you got to be bold, right? And, even if you're in a position not to, you really need the job. That'd be my view.
I would second that. And, worst case scenario is they say no, right? It doesn't hurt asking. That would be my kind of take on it.
Yeah, I think that doesn't hurt to try. I do think the negotiation has to be very respectful and thought out before you go into negotiation. If it's a very clear cut introductory role and you don't have skills that differentiate yourself that much from the other hires, that's pretty hard to argue why you should be paid more than the person next to you, nor is it super fair of the company to do. So recognize that sometimes there just isn't places to argue on physical salary, but there might be places to get compensation in other areas or have other sort of aspects of your role. And then I would also recommend that there's lots of different, whether they're podcasts or books or things, some resources on business negotiation, some specifically targeted towards women in business negotiation and some generalized. And I think that taking a little bit and making sure you understand not just that I should negotiate, but also how to, can be really beneficial towards those conversations.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes at the end of the day, an additional $5,000, let's say a year, that could really not be worth it if it's not with the right company. So really keep in mind the company culture and that environment as well, because you may be wishing that you would have taken less money elsewhere based on the company you pick sometimes. So money's not everything.
We have a question of concern from our audience. They would like to know, will negotiating an offer ever take away the job offer?
Not in my experience.
Yeah, I think the only time it would approach that is if you're going back and forth. So you say, okay, here's what I'm countering with, and then they come back and say, the company says, okay, here it is. Well, and then you say, well, wait, I actually want, if you're kind of going back and forth and a little wishy-washy, at some point I would, the company's going to say, look, we're okay. So I think back to Sean's point, just being reasonable and, like Caroline said, be professional in how you approach it.
Well, we still have questions rolling in, so as you continue to think of things, don't be afraid to put them down there in the chat button. As you've heard from our panelists, they'll answer anything that they can. And our next question is going back to what we talked about, a little about differentiation. How can you stand out when applying online?
I think
Sean, you want to? Oh, good, Caroline.
I think just from tips that I've done and from practices I've put in place is when we are in this, and I even know from the company I'm currently working at that all of our recruiting in the fall will be virtual. So sadly, this is not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. And so I think recognizing how to do this, but I think if that person, if the recruiter or whoever is reading all the applications has even seen your name before, whether you've reached out to them and said, I've been reading on your website and I learned this and I had a quick question about the job, whether it was reaching out to connect or to learn. But if they've even seen your name before, or maybe have heard, or you have a mutual connection, that's always super helpful.
Yep, completely agree. Although it may be hard to stand out as much in terms of a resume or cover letter, attaching your name to other events, maybe you're attending a live at the Keyot Café podcast, and that's where we first see your name. Maybe you attended a career fair. Those are great ways to really stand out within the application process.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sorry, go ahead. I defer to Sean and Caroline on that.
So our next question, the person wrote in, my summer internship was canceled in a role that would have trained me to be a product owner. Are there any recommendations you have on getting professional mentorships during the COVID era?
Yeah, I think it comes back to really reaching out to people that are in your existing network and trying to build out relationships that way. Google is your friend as well. I know personally, I wanted to grow my skills in terms of data management and was struggling to find an internship. And I just typed in data management nonprofit. And 2 weeks later, I was working for a local nonprofit, helping with some of their work in Excel. So Google is your friend, your existing network's your friend.
Yeah, I would also say if you're a current college student or even a recent grad, utilizing career services. I know my college has a specific mentor-mentee program where you can get connected to alumni that have already demonstrated interest in being a mentor. And so I know a lot of my friends have done that and had a lot of success through that for local business leaders. So I would definitely say reach out to both your current network and use your school career services.
Yes, Jeff, I would agree. In this question, I think it's definitely existing someone that that's willing to invest that time. It's going to be very difficult to reach out to somebody a new connection and get time like that.
Throughout our conversation today, we talked a little bit about company culture and how important the company culture can be when working in a job. What are some ways to truly understand a company's culture, especially in a virtual environment?
I think one great question to ask now would be, how did you treat your employees or projects during COVID-19? And you can kind of get some insight into how they adapted to some unprecedented challenges that affected pretty much every company. I think that would be one strategy.
I think one of my favorite questions to ask when networking is asking someone their favorite and least favorite aspects of their job. I think in seeing how willing they are to be honest and open with you. And then I think asking the people as you're networking to describe their company culture. You can't physically experience it, but trying to experience it through them a little bit, I think can also be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. I mean, get specific, make your own specific observations, through conversations or specific examples and how the company dealt with something that you can benchmark with others. I would say don't, assume generalizations. They're typically probably not accurate. I think to a certain extent, yes, but maybe you can look at that at a high level. But yeah, I think the best way is just really to talk to people, as many people as you can, right? But again, data points, right? That's a culture of just depending on the size of a company is going to be very difficult to put a pin on. So, I think that's a whole discussion in its own right.
I think it's also important to understand how you define company culture. Are you looking for that company that has the kegs out on Fridays and has the ping pong tables in the lunchroom, or are you looking for a company that's really more focused on the relationships, willing to pick you up from the airport after a late fly-in, things like that? So how do you define company culture is also really important.
So typically, part of the go ahead, Jeff.
Well, as you said, that company sounds pretty good, that first one you talked about. So I'd like to talk to them.
Maybe we can pull out some virtual ping pong tables here. But our next question here is talking a little bit more about the job process. So you submitted an application and the employer might come back and ask for some references. How impactful are references and what tips do you have for choosing them?
So I think references can be impactful. I think within the Crew 212 program, they're not as important in terms of our hiring decisions. I think it's important not to pick your friends for your references. I think it's really important to understand that those need to be people who have seen your applied work ethic over a number of months or years. So using professors, for example, would be a good person to choose.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I hear from various people that references are less important because, you're choosing them and you're obviously not going to go somebody, who you don't think is going to give you a good reference. But I agree, Sean. I mean, if you're going to have them, make sure there is, prominent and, he or she is as accomplished as possible, right? So it's much better to get, from, a senator of the United States it is than, like you said, your friend that you went to school with, right? So just those are important. But again, I think it's going to be limited because those are things that become, sadly more of a commodity.
As a follow-up to that, for students who are still in college and they're facing the next year potentially still being virtual, do you think that references will still be important and students will still be expected to find those references?
I think expectations around references will probably stay relatively the same just because COVID probably hasn't changed a whole lot in terms of gathering those references and providing them to the employer. So that'd be my take on it. But I think that they are kind of being something that's phased out, maybe on the more entry-level side of things.
In addition to that, let's say I'm a December 2020 graduate or even a May 2021 graduate. What can I be doing right now to help prepare me for my job search?
I think one of the best things is to start networking in industries that you know. If there's companies that are going to be at the career fair, or if there's a specific industry you want to work in, start networking and reaching out to people now. I think especially and I would also recognize when the recruiting dates are. So I would start now if you're recruiting in the fall, but if you're not recruiting until the spring, it might be more prudent to start networking in the fall. I don't think there ever can be too early, but I think that's one of the best ways to prepare. And then also make sure that whatever you're doing this summer, you are doing something that you can put on your resume, and then also spend time making sure that your resume, your LinkedIn profile, all of your virtual presences are as professional as possible.
Yeah, I would echo all the same. I would say really just avoid doing nothing with your time. If you have a summer off, make sure you're taking a class, you're picking up a certification, you have a part-time job, maybe you find an internship, maybe you find a local mentor or help with a nonprofit. As long as you're doing something that's helping you move towards some of your professional goals, I think that's really important. And then really getting acquainted with your resources. So trying to better understand the different job platforms and what they do, what's most popular, understanding who your advisor is, and understanding the resources that career services can provide is really important too.
We've talked a lot today about networking. After you network with someone, how do you go about making that ask when a job gets posted down the road? Yeah,
great question. So Molly S., who was on earlier, helped me with a great networking tip, and that's to maintain relationships and reach out to someone, not always when you need something. So reach out just for a friendly coffee, reach out with a friendly question, or to touch base on maybe how their recent spring break trip went. So make sure you're really putting the maintenance into those relationships, not only when you need something.
Yeah, I agree. Really good point. Ideally, it's a genuine relationship connection you've made. And by the way, I saw a job posting you had. I think that's really powerful. You're not always going to be able to do that, and if you can't, at least for me, I would certainly make sure you remind the person of when you met and what if it's been some time, where that situation was that you had established the relationship.
And sometimes providing no update is still an update. Maybe this individual knows you on your job search, but it has been 3 months since you followed up. Simply reaching back out and saying, hey, I'm still on the job hunt. Any additional tips you can share? That kind of no update is still an update.
Agree.
Our questions are starting to trickle out here a little bit, so I want to pause for a few seconds and go ahead and post any remaining questions you have in our chat box below. And while those final questions are rolling in, I want to ask each one of our panelists, what is one piece of advice you would give anyone looking for a job right now?
I can start, but I'm going to go back to something I brought up earlier, and I've talked about quite a bit, and that's really to focus your job search on your existing network and really look within people that you've already written off that can help you, your family, your friends, and your neighbors, and really try to reach out and have a conversation about their job, why they chose it, what they enjoy about it, what they don't like about it, how their interview process went, and if they have any opportunities moving forward. And that could be an intro call for 15 minutes. That could be a job shadow for a few hours. And that could end up being an internship in the future too. So really look within your network and reach out to people you may have already written off as someone that can help you.
Yeah, so I can also echo a little bit what I said earlier is that keep learning, whether that's something you're really passionate about that you can talk about and make connections with people in a career field, or whether those are skills that will translate really well to a job that you're searching. Don't just be idle in the job process, apply and then go do something else. Make sure that you're continuing to improve yourself and improve your candidacy.
Yeah, so two things from my perspective. One is don't give up, persevere. It's like we said earlier, it's just a really tough process, but it'll be a very short kind of segment of your life when you look back. So you will get through it, and never give up. Just keep pushing forward. And the second one is, kind of my theme is, demonstrate that you've made an investment. Through research, through the analysis, applicability of your background, or even aspirations to the company or the job, right? You've made an investment, demonstrate that, and then hopefully the person will recognize that and give you the time that you deserve.
Well, we have 3 more questions that rolled in, so we'll answer those today, and then we'll send everybody off to grab some lunch. So the first question is, do you think you should add an interest section to your resume? For example, hobbies you like, or podcasts or organizations you're involved in?
I personally don't think that section is as important. If you do have quite a bit of white space and you're looking to fill it maybe a little bit earlier in on your college career, I would say that might be appropriate. But I would say if you're a recent college graduate or a graduating senior, I would probably avoid that section and try to fill it with something closer to a skills section or a relevant project section. Sections that are going to be able to show some of your experience and how it can be applied to the role you're pursuing.
Our next question is, some job applications ask you to put in your years of experience. Do you think an internship counts towards years of experience?
From a Crew 212 perspective, internship experience is definitely something we look for and something that we count within the number of years we're looking for. But I don't know how that applies across other organizations. I think regardless of if they consider it to be counted in their years of experience, I think regardless, you put in the work and you gain valuable knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It counts. It's work you've done. I would include it.
And our last question here, while during COVID jobs are hard to find, would you recommend going back to school for continued education?
I think it depends on your situation and what type of career you're pursuing. I will say I know a lot of recent college graduates that are considering or have joined a master's level program to further their skills or kind of get through the storm of some of the challenges that have been presented in the recent months. So I would say if that's in the cards and you're able to financially make it happen and you're a lifelong learner, I would say go for it. If you think that the master level degree is going to add value to your career, then I would say go for it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've got lots of degrees and certifications, and I'll be the first one to say I would throw them out the window, right? I mean, I think I did a lot of those because I didn't want it to be something that disqualified me, and and you know, I had general interest, but I think each person needs to make that decision on their own, whether whatever it is, the $100,000 and the 2 years, 3 years is worth it in the long run. I think, you know, if you do the math right earlier in your career, you probably have a better chance to take advantage of that. But I still think, you know, strongly that experience, real life experience, is number one, right? So I think you can balance it with some academics, but you know, if I would lean towards getting your hands dirty, you know, doing some, you know, volunteer work, just to demonstrate that, you know, you're really trying to get that hands-on experience. But that's my personal opinion. So I think it's a personal decision.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Caroline.
Oh, I was just going to say, kind of to wrap it up, that if you really want a job, go after that. If that's what you really want, stick that out. And it might take a little bit longer to find one, but I don't believe that it'll be impossible for you to find a job if you widen your stance a little bit, and if you really are intentional to go after that. But don't go to grad school if what you really want to do is work. But if what you really want to do is go to grad school and get that experience to get you into another area, I think that's great. But I wouldn't necessarily say grad school is the only thing you can be doing right now.
Well, Sean, Jeff, Caroline, is there any other knowledge or little nuggets of wisdom you'd like to share with our group today? No? All right. Well, in that case, first of all, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and experience with the rest of us. And thank you to everybody who joined us. We really hope you walk away with some good tips and knowledge that you can use during this time or even as we head into the future. Keyot does host Live from the Keyot Café every month and also other activities as well. So we encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram for further events and activities. But overall, thank you and stay positive.